And welcome to Go Your Way. I'm Greg Neerman, joined again with Phoebe Go. And Phoebe, every time I hear the intro tune, I want to get tapping in my shoes.
Well, it's always like a good lead into a really exciting topic that we're going to be talking about, which I think today is one of my favorite public cloud providers, AWS, right?
Yeah, obviously they're the largest out there. They've really carved kind of the path that so many organizations are going down. So I think it's really critically important for us to dive in as part of this series around data protection, around what is AWS doing around data protection, where are their priorities, and where do they see the most benefit out of this. And I want to introduce our very special guest this week. He's the EMEA manager for storage specialist solutions architects at AWS. Boy, and his name is Mark Toomey. And Mark, I apologize. Boy, that is a mouthful of a title.
There's a lot of S's in that title. It's like you
yeah,
should
there
be
is. I need to come up with one where it's nothing but vowels. Just nothing but vowels. I know there's someone out there. They've written something. It's an algorithm. It'll do the job.
It'll do it for you. But it's so great to have you, Mark. And again, as we talked about in the intro, if we think about the role that AWS has played in public cloud and kind of being the shepherds for the whole industry in this space, when we talk about the critical importance of data protection and the risks of data loss, ransomware, and other things, AWS has been way ahead of this curve. And I think a lot of when people think about AWS data protection, they think about AWS at scale and being able to deliver services at scale and the experience and the length of time that AWS has been doing this. Give us a sense. I mean, obviously that's kind of low hanging fruit for us, right? We know that AWS leads in this space. What is it, I think, unique about AWS from a data protection perspective and a GDPR perspective that we should be conscious of?
It's an interesting question, and Greg and Phoebe, thank you for inviting me on. When you think about AWS, you have to think about global scale. You mentioned scale earlier, but the idea that this is global, that the amount of availability zones in the regions that we have distributed all over the world, and not how easy, because I don't want to put it in that way, but we do make the ability for customers to transmit data across borders. I may as well use the word easy. We can make that easy if you so choose, subject to your internal controls, etc., etc. So what people need to keep in mind if they are operating at a global scale is, are you going to be compliant with the data protection laws and regulations if you're using AWS? Well, we have the concept of the shared responsibility model. When you look at things like GDPR, how you manage personally identifiable information, you deal with things like that. What AWS actually does is provides a strong technical foundation for customers to implement measures to manage the processing of their data. We do this through access control, encryption, monitoring, auditing, logging, etc., etc. But when we talk about making sure that you are compliant with regulations when you're using AWS, we can provide you with all these tools at the infrastructure layer. But there is that concept of shared responsibility where we take care of the infrastructure, the applications, and the data is a customer proficiency. We see customers need to be proficient there, and when you factor in the global scale of AWS, you really need to know what you have, how you're moving it. We do provide tools for you to get in to do that, but you have to use them. So I'm thinking, just keep in mind, if you're operating at scale, you can be compliant with various data protection laws across multiple different regions if you use AWS.
That sums it up really nicely, I think. And I think the shared responsibility model, we've spoken about this actually before on many podcasts, I think, Greg. I think it really is interesting how when you start to cross physical borders, but because the infrastructure is located anywhere, it makes that a little bit murky. So you start to need to use tools like artificial intelligence or to use proactive alerting and so on to tell you, oh, hey, this is actually crossing this would be crossing a physical border if it was on a floppy disk, being transmitted. But in this case, it's some bits and bytes going across a wire. Where I think this is really top of mind for people is in that ransomware discussion, right? Where not only are you now thinking about, okay, I'm operating at global scale, I have data that possibly belongs to a lot of people across the world or across different jurisdictions, but now I'm also at risk of losing it or perhaps getting it corrupted or locked down or hold at ransom, right? Kind of how do you see that playing in the AWS space, and what are people doing to really support attacking this vector, right?
Yeah, look, the world has, when we talk about crime, crime always flows towards the easy money. And the easy money at the moment has been automated ransomware at scale. Now we use the term at scale at everything. There are two. You consider it. There are two types of threats. People might say they're multiple, but I divide them up to two. There's the automated stuff that gets around the place, breaks its way through your external perimeter, gets in, makes a connection back after encrypting some data or not. Sometimes speed is important for this. They want to get as much done as they can because they recognize they'll be detected. That is one level of threat. An additional level of threat is someone who drops something into your organization and then ends up with a remote access terminal into your organization. Is the human more dangerous than automated ransomware? Yes. Someone with malicious intent, be they an insider or an outsider, is quite dangerous inside your organization. But if we just look at ransomware as in stuff that maybe automatically encrypts your data as quickly as possible, that is a denial of service attack on your data. We have the concept of distributed denial of service attacks to take down websites. Well, what's ransomware? If it encrypts your data, renders your backups inaccessible, that's a denial of service on your data. And there is that fee, that usually some form of cryptocurrency fee to unlock that. But when we examine all these things, if I was to look at from an AWS point of view, how I would approach that, I see there are 5 phases. There's an identify phase, where you identify the data that you feel you need to protect. Most organizations, I need to protect everything. You know what? Data has different value. Some things have more value than others, right? Some things can be rebuilt, other things cannot, right? They are unique. Then there's the protection phase, and we've a whole bunch of services out there like Firewall Manager, Web Access Firewall, Secrets Manager, Config. There is the detection phase on the size of protect and detect. I mean, we have things that will do automated patching, will do the compliance for your instances that are running inside of EC2. Will tell you, hey, this stuff needs to be patched. This is out of compliance. I'm going to alert someone. You wrap all that in permissions with permissions policies. We have a detective. We have a security hub. It's like the multitude of AWS services out there. And then there's respond. How do you respond to these things? Do Lambda functions execute to help with protect your data, to help bring data back from beyond your storage of last resort? Do you need to scale out what has survived the attack? And beyond that, I mean, how do you manage backups? Backups are all versioned replicas, and that's a NetApp term going way back when. What's a backup? A backup is a versioned replica. So when we consider management of backups, we are managing versioned replicas. And in this case, that could be snapshots, it could be individual files, it could be entire images from a disaster recovery point of view that you're just going to restart everything, or it could be a single file recovery.
We're talking about ransomware here, Mark. I think it's a fair question to ask, just your personal perspective. When we hear about whether we focus on the recovery, do we just pay the ransomware hackers so that we've got expedience in trying to recover? Do you personally have a philosophy on pay or remediate? And what do you think on that?
I have shifted position on this. Early on, when this was, every now and then, it was a case of I did something I shouldn't have. I connected my Active Directory systems to my production and to my backup system, right? And therefore, I've made a mistake. that single point was attacked. Now everything is ruined. You're thinking, okay, you may or may not have the skills to actually like remediate from this. Maybe you should consider paying them. That was way back when. But things have become so brazen. My view is these days, no. My view these days is no. It's and we had this recently in this country in Ireland with the health service. And
Oh
we
yeah.
didn't pay. It took the health service
Yeah.
out, and we didn't pay the ransom. And eventually, you just have to say, "This is supposed to be easy money for you. I'm not going to make it easy." No, and that's just a personal opinion. It's not a statement from behind any company or something like that.
No,
But
no,
the,
no, no.
but
And
there are people out there that they do not have the IT skills, and this is all they have. And I can understand why they pay. But if you have skills and you have the ability to rebuild, it's like I'm not giving you a cent or a
You make
Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, you talk about AWS having, I mean, you have, we said it even earlier before we joined the call, like there's hundreds of AWS services out there that give you all of this capability to build your identification through to your protection, through to your mitigation kind of strategies.
Respond, you recover. Yep.
Yeah, but you do need to have the skill sets to put them all together. Is that something that AWS is seeing more? More need for AWS providing those skills and kind of helping those customers across that barrier of entry? Or are you seeing that it's other parties like third parties, GSIs, systems integrators, partners, and that sort of thing? What does the ecosystem look like?
The ecosystem, no, I think the easiest thing someone can do is actually turn on versioning, right? Turn on versioning, turn on locking. You can do that in Amazon S3, right? You can move things to Glacier, where should assume they're offline. You can use the storage tiers inside that AWS provides in object storage, and just at a minimum use those. You can do weird things like we have a storage gateway with a tape interface. Right, for the most part, ransomware ignores tape interfaces. That doesn't mean that it all does, right? But for most of it is like, I'm encrypting disks because again, this is supposed to be easy money for these people. But when we consider all of that and we look at what's going on there, what I do see is that the people with the skills are building more bespoke implementations. We have the concept of a cyber vault, which is, without getting into the details, is almost like a secure location. I describe it almost like the money drawer in a bank. If you remember banks in the olden days, you drop your you drop your money in, it would get pulled, someone would take that out and put it in the other side, and they're in a secure area. Well, you do something similar with data. You're laughing.
I feel like it's going into space. I feel like this current trend of certain very, very, very intelligent and rich people moving into space. I love the idea of going, well, I put my data, it's somewhere on Mars now. Yeah. You can't get it. I can.
Yeah. What are you gonna do about it? Is this SSD certified for intergalactic travel? It's like it's the gold record, right, on the Voyager probes, right? I've etched it onto a gold record and launched it into space.
Or on Blue Origin.
It's Blue Origin is that if you were to launch something with Blue Origin on New Shepard today, it's going to come back down in a few moments. New Glenn is the bigger booster that'll be able to send things out into space, but I know nothing about that. That's Jeff's. That's what Jeff is doing.
That's another episode to have that conversation.
New Glenn is a Jeff conversation. Where's the right. So where's the BN4 engine, Jeff? That's a new
you started to hit on it a little bit. As far as that shared responsibility, I guess I'm curious, especially with the depth of expertise that AWS has across all of the services. How do we look at AWS best practices and kind of leveraging that history and that experience into existing and even new users to the AWS experience?
Everything that you have seen in Well Architected applies to this situation. The security pillar of Well Architected applies to the situation. The idea of access controls and permissions applies to the situation. So the fundamentals are the same. The fundamentals are always going to be the same. There are various frameworks, like there's a NIST cybersecurity framework out there. Now these things they don't really deal with implementation; they deal with the concepts, right? But the idea of mapping that to well architected, mapping that to auditing, to access control, to monitoring, to patching, to all of these things, to versioning and object locking. That's quite important. So I will say, get your fundamentals right. If you can get well architected right, you're building on a great foundation as part of that shared responsibility model, because we're doing well architected ourselves, right, to keep the infrastructure, keep that moving, right, keep it secure, keep it safe. But we need that it's us doing it alone is no good for you. We need to do this together. And if you get the fundamentals of well architected right, you're well along the way. Incidents happen with the best of intentions. I don't believe for a second that there was any person working in an IT department who got a page at a ridiculous time in the morning, or came in one day to realize this is the worst day at work. This is the worst day at work I've ever had, because all of our systems have been absolutely obliterated. And there's someone looking for money, and we have the board are meeting, right? And the board are asking the CEO, who is asking my boss, my immediate boss, how things are going. There was no ill intentions here. People have had the best of intentions. Ransomware happens. What are you willing to do? What have you done? What have you tested for when the worst thing does happen?
And I mean, how do you find that applying more in a hybrid space? Now, I know hybrid is kind of the cool topic here for a lot of businesses, knowing or thinking really that this is not a destination but a journey, and they've realized that part of the journey is sometimes we put things in other cloud providers, we bring them back on premises, we do other things with them. What is the role of hybrid in a data protection and a security standpoint, thinking of all these topics we've covered today?
Hybrid still has a role. There's lots of data centers out there. There's not as many of them being built as there used to be, but there's a lot of data centers out there. There's a lot of data out there. The thing that you're looking at, especially when it comes to data protection, is, do you have an offsite copy? Is that offsite copy available to you when you require it? So for people in the data center, there are various options to use AWS as your offsite copy, to use Glacier as your offsite copy. You might have some form of high performance SSD or disk buffer on premises, which stores backups for an amount of time. And then for your longer term retention, you might be sending that off to something like Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive. You might be sending it to S3. The backup applications and even the storage arrays have that level of integration in there that they can support this off-site copy that can be used to revive your business if you're having the worst day.
It's really interesting, Mark, when we talk to particularly small business environments that may not have been cloud natives, but as they get into the cloud, there's this kind of odd inefficiency I see periodically, to where when we say, kind of a copy offline, they're literally thinking about like a storage device locally, and taking the data that they're leveraging within AWS or any of the cloud providers and keeping a local physical copy of that data. It seems counterintuitive when we think about being able to replicate and back up across multiple zones, so you don't have to worry, and across multiple regions, you don't have to have that worry. But there is kind of that small element of smaller businesses that like that sense of control, that at least that they're in their worst day, there is a local copy of their data. Is that something you run into often, or are we getting past that point to where people are starting to trust the architectures in public cloud?
It's still there, right? It's still there. There's more of it there than I would prefer. But you know what? The offsite copy is a great thing. I had a customer, I shall give no names, and they were using tape, and a tape cartridge would be popped out, and one of the secretaries she was a motorcycle rider at the time, she'd pop it in the saddlebags and take it home for the night. That was the offsite copy. There was an aspect of modernization there when they paid a load of money for an SAP environment to run their infrastructure. And then it was decided, right, we're going to send this stuff offsite in a different way. Now, they could still use their tape interface, put it to the gateway, but then it was just uploaded and stored inside of Glacier and Glacier Deep Archive. So the idea here is, what's the level of friction? When you have poor network links, when you have there is friction in the process, well, we do it in a particular way, I'd have to change it. That's difficult. When you make it as frictionless as possible, that's when they'll make the change. They'll go, well, this isn't that hard, and they'll go off and they'll change because of that. And that's what we're always looking to do, especially in the business that we're in data storage, data protection, archiving, the whole lot. If we make it frictionless, if we make classification of data frictionless, if people can understand what they have, we make it as easy as possible, people will do it. Unfortunately, data has been sometimes it's the junk drawer. It's like, I'm not willing to get into that and do this. And I know, especially in the NetApp business, in the array side of the business, there's been classification, there's been auto tiering, there's been things like that. It's all about making it frictionless to use that. And that's what, when we make things frictionless on premises, in the cloud, in between whatever's going on, hybrid environments, the uptake will just take off. It's when there is friction that is the biggest thing. So I look at everything, and I see new services now. Sometimes I'm as surprised as some of you folks out there. I would love to make out that I sit inside AWS and like the great, I won't say like the all-powerful Oz, because he was a fraud, but like some Oracle. Yeah, I don't want to use the O word either, because I may get sued by someone in Redwood Shores. But like some, we won't talk about databases and why I think you should be using the ones in AWS, but you should be. But the thing is that I'd like to make out that I had some giant view of everything that's going on inside of AWS. That is not true. I hear about some things in different parts of AWS about the same time as you do, and even then, if it isn't our stuff, if it isn't my immediate area of focus, and it's I go back to people going, right, here's a sharp edge. How do we sand this down? So try to do it in storage, try to do it across AWS. Storage people kind of listen to me. Oh, it's the crazy man from EMEA. The other services go, oh, it's the crazy man from EMEA, but we don't have to do too much with that guy. But going back to it, make it frictionless. That's hard. It's that final 10%. But if you do it, utilization goes off the charts.
You are so right. I am on board with that. I love that takeaway, and I'm going to try and bring that into every conversation I have this week. So thanks so much.
That's
Mark.
going to be. I know you're at home right now, but that's going to be exciting with the next person in your personal life that you meet. Let's talk about friction-free product development. And you go, what? Yep. Ooh, it's like I'm not locked in. It's no more shelter in place. I can leave now. See ya, Phoebe.
Right.
We could continue this conversation for probably another 20 or 30 minutes and put everybody to sleep. But Mark,
how dare you?
But I do want. I want to come back to the point here about the great relationship that NetApp and AWS have, and how it's constantly evolving. And so looking forward to having more conversations with you, Mark, as the relationship grows. In the near term, though, how can people reach out to you if they've got any questions, if you've sparked some ideas that they want to follow up with you on? How can they reach out to you?
You can find me on Twitter at StorageZilla. Don't bother. I'll just talk about Marvel movies and what I hate about them. But yeah, I'm out there anyway. Professionally, I'm on LinkedIn, Mark Toomey. You'll find, if you see one with the ridiculous job title, maybe filled with vowels.
Scrolling.
Yeah, maybe filled with vowels. That's me. But what I will say, especially about NetApp, in a former life, you were a hell of a competitor, and in this new life, and in a past life to this, you're a hell of a partner. So always happy to work with NetApp.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you
for joining us. And Phoebe, as we've gone through the course of this whole series, and we want to encourage everybody to watch the rest of this series, the Go Your Way series around data protection. It's really enlightening. And I particularly like this one with AWS. Again, we're talking about kind of the trailblazers in the industry for this and the best practices and understanding, I think, from extending the greatest value for your environment and what we can learn from AWS is always valuable.
Sure. And I think, I mean, they were, like you said, trailblazers. I think is a great term because they've built some of the most, most forward-thinking, futuristic kind of application platforms to be able to do a lot of the analysis, the data collection, the data storage that we need really to compete in this, with this world of ransomware, with new regulations coming up all the time, with just the scale of data and needing to back it up and restore from it and get access to those copies around the world. I think, AWS has a really good head start on a lot of that. They've built a lot of those tools, and it's great to see how it's evolving in both partnership and also internally at AWS, how they're kind of looking at this going forward. So yeah, I think that was a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to the rest of them on this series. And as always, it's such a pleasure to be on Go Your Way with you, Greg. Make sure you subscribe if you like this. Watch the rest of our episodes, and we'll see you all next time on Go Your Way.
Thank you, Phoebe.